Yo guys, what is going on? My name is Vexoid, but you can call me Nick, and today I'm bringing you the Mac Miller discography ranking. If you guys know, or if you don't know, I did this with Eminem, and that was about a month or so ago now, and I asked you, who do you want to see next? And I got a comment from Mac Miller, and I thought that was very interesting. I've never got into his music before doing this. I never really listened to any of his music. I knew a couple of songs, like I knew the Donald Trump song, I knew Knock Knock, and I knew Hand Me Downs, if you know those three songs. That's about it. So I went through and I listened to all of these albums: K.I.D.S, Best Day Ever, Blue Slide Park, Macadelic, Watching Movies with the Sound Off, Faces, Good AM, Divine Feminine, Swimming, and Circles. Listen to all of them twice for the sake of this video so I could feel like I could speak about them better, so I can understand them better, so I can get a more genuine impression. Because in the Eminem video, I've been an Eminem fan since I was like literally 9 or 10. But Mac Miller, like I said, wasn't really into him until this video. Now he's featured all over my playlists. So I just wanted to go through and do the discography ranking. So let's just get right into it, starting chronologically. Obviously, we're going to start with the K.I.D.S album. And let's see, where do I think this should go? Actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to rank these three albums together since they're somewhat similar in my opinion. They're all going to be in the same tier, I'll give that away, but I don't know the order. I don't know which is the best, middle best, and third best out of these three albums. I don't know how to rank them. So I think at the top of A spot, I'm gonna have to go with Best Day Ever. Best Day Ever goes to the top of A. Then, following that, I'm gonna have to do Blue Slide Park at second best. And then, obviously, because you could just figure it out through process of elimination, K.I.D.S is gonna go into the third spot. So that's three albums ranked. Now let me explain them. Mac Miller kind of has two sides to his discography, I've kind of realized. He has, well, with an in-between. He has the early stuff, which is like the hype frat kid music. It's popularly described as, you know, the upbeat, you know, kids, like these three albums. If you know, I'm trying to describe it like you don't know who Mac Miller is, but if you don't know who Mac Miller is and you don't know his music, you're probably not watching this video. So I'm going to assume you know Mac and his discography. So you have these three albums, which are like the hype frat party kid type music in the beginning, which I'm a fan of. Most Mac fans don't seem to be a fan of this style of Mac. I'm a big fan of it. K.I.D.S is all three of these are really good albums, obviously, but let me explain why they got the rankings they did in chronological order. K.I.D.S came in last because I wanted to put it in first, but then I realized it has probably the best songs out of all three of these, like Senior Skip Day, The Spins, Knock Knock, A. Those are all really, really top tier Mac Miller songs in my opinion, but I am not just ranking it off of like star power of individual songs. I'm ranking it as an album entirely, and K.I.D.S has just a lot of mediocre, skippable songs in my opinion. But if it didn't have like the Senior Skip Day, The Spins, Knock Knock, A, Kool-Aid and Frozen Pizza, Don't Mind If I Do, the one with the Fireflies beat, it would probably be in B tier, if not C tier. Probably not C tier, definitely B tier. But those songs boost the album heavily. But if I had to listen to the album without those songs, I really would not enjoy the album nearly as much. So getting it the bottom of A tier, I think, is fair, because the only thing getting it into A tier are those main songs I just listed: Senior Skip Day, The Spins, Knock Knock, Kool-Aid and Frozen Pizza, that's a decent one. Don't Mind If I Do, that's a decent one. And A on the deluxe album. So that's why that goes into that spot. Then we have Best Day Ever, which is kind of just like a continuation of K.I.D.S in a way. People popularly describe it as a K.I.D.S 2.0, and I can see why, because, you know, it's generally the same type of music, but I think the album in its entirety is a step up from K.I.D.S. I don't think Best Day Ever has quite the amount of banger songs as K.I.D.S do, like has on that album. I don't know how does, whatever. You get what I'm saying. It does have good songs though. Like the song Best Day Ever, I think is a good song. Donald Trump, it is one of those Mac Miller greatest of all time songs. Political opinions aside, Donald Trump, one of the best songs by Mac Miller. Wake Up is a good song. I'll Be There, In the Air, that's another absolute banger. In the Air, another one of those top-notch bangers. Life Ain't Easy and Snooze, you know, there's decent songs on this album. So overall, I think in its entirety, it's better than K.I.D.S. And let me explain Blue Slide Park. just to reiterate, K.I.D.S, you know, the banger songs off of K.I.D.S is probably better than the banger songs off of Best Day Ever, but in its entirety, Best Day Ever overall is a better album than K.I.D.S overall. And then Blue Slide Park, people don't really seem to like this album, but this finds its way in the middle of these two, in my opinion, because once again, it continues on that hype music frat vibe thing, but it has a little bit more diversity in the beats and the experimentation that Mac was going with, in my opinion. Like, there's the Party on Fifth Ave song. I like the beat on that one that has that like deep, heavy saxophone. I thought that was very interesting. Up All Night, that's like a punk-ish, rockish vibe, which is different from Mac Miller, but I appreciated the, you know, I appreciated it that it was different. And a lot of the songs do a little things like that, unlike K.I.D.S and Best Day Ever, which is why it finds its way in the middle, because sometimes it does miss occasionally. You know, not every single song on this album is a banger. What's the one song? Under the Weather is another one of those absolute bangers, in my opinion. Under the Weather is one of the greatest, maybe my favorite Mac Miller song. Missed Calls, another one of those. Man in the Hat's all good. Up All Night, as I already said. PA Nights, Blue Slide Park, Party on Fifth Ave, those are all banger songs. So while not many people seem to enjoy the hype side of Mac Miller, and these three albums usually get B at the highest, usually averaging around C and sometimes D on people's lists, I enjoy this side of Mac, and I think it needs to be appreciated for what it is. You know, people probably got into Mac Miller based off of like the watching movies with the sound off, or Good AM, or even Swimming in Circles. You know, he wasn't always like that, and you can't be expecting those kinds of albums out of these albums. Look at these albums for what they are, and I think you will see them as good albums. Unless you just generally do not like the style of rap whatsoever, and you're only into Mac Miller for the, you know, later style of music he made, then yeah, it makes sense why you don't like these. But I try to keep an open mind with music. That's why I can be a Death Grips fan, and that's why I end up liking these. So up next, we have Macadelic, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this one before I rank it. This is the introduction to that like chill Mac Miller I was talking about, how he has that early hype vibe like here, and then he has like the more chill, mellow, I guess if the stereotype for these albums are like frat kid, I guess the stereotype for this type of album would be stoner music, I guess you could call it. And I do like this side of Mac Miller. As you can see, some of these other albums will rank highly, but Macadelic is really just not it, in my opinion, and I felt crazy for having that opinion. And this is the album that actually inspired me to listen to every album twice, and I listened to it twice from beginning to end, and I had the same opinion. It just was not there, and I felt crazy because everyone's putting this at minimum like A tier. I don't think I've seen it lower than B ever on anyone's list through Reddit, album of the year, things like that. I don't see it any lower than that. So I felt crazy for a long time listening to this and being like, I just don't get it. Overall, I found it just to be like a step down in overall quality. The songs, to me, like a new listener of Mac Miller, they're all very, very similar, and they're very hard to distinguish one from another. Listening to this album twice now, still couldn't distinguish a single one of the songs, which doesn't happen on like, it happens a little bit in his early discography, and these three albums mainly happens a little bit, I won't lie, but not to the extent it seems to happen on Macadelic. I literally could not pick one song out of Macadelic from another, and I listened to it like full focus 2 times. And the other thing is, it just dragged on for way too long, in my opinion, as well. And the album's only an hour, so it really shouldn't feel long. But when I listened to it, especially the second time around, it felt really long. There's like 4 or 5 songs off of this album that could have been cut, but I can't really tell you which ones they are, because to me, they all blend in with each other. And obviously, I'm not trying to disrespect Mac Miller. I'm a Mac Miller fan, you know, rest in peace. You know, I'm a big fan of him and his story and everything like that. And also keep in mind, if this is like your favorite album and I'm upsetting you, keep in mind, at the end of the day, something like music is mostly all subjective, unless something is just objectively mixed terribly or it doesn't flow. Like, those things are objective. But, you know, no one like Mac Miller, like Eminem, like those are the 2 I've reviewed, that's why I named them. No one like these people are going to have those errors. So when it is ranked, you know, it is all just subjective based. And I just don't like the Macadelic album. Like, there are a couple okay songs. Looking back at the list of songs off this album, Thoughts from a Balcony is okay, and Vitamins is probably the best song on the album, although didn't make a playlist. It didn't make any of my playlists still, those two songs. If the album went more in the direction that the song Vitamins went, like in the chronological storytelling type rap, I think the album overall would have resonated better with me. But like the sporadic nature of the album and the songs feeling like so scatterbrained, you know, it just didn't really make me enjoy the album too much. I know you don't need to be on one topic in a song. Like Eminem, one of my favorite rappers, he does that all the time. Like in one of his early songs, As the World Turns, you know, he is saying the most random shit. He's saying like, I took out my pocket knife and sliced off a right nipple just trying to buy me some time. Then I remembered his magic trick. You know, things like that. He's rapping all over the place. But even in a song like that from Eminem, where he's just literally saying random shit, like whipping out magic tricks, slicing girls' nipples off with a pocket knife, and then the girl swallows his leg whole like an egg roll. While that's completely sporadic, it still kind of followed a path of a very fabricated fictional story. It still followed a path, and most of the songs in Macadelic just don't even do that. They're just literally like random thought, random unconnected thought, random unconnected thought, random unconnected thought, and I was just like, I guess I see why people like this, but to me, I really just did not enjoy the album. Like I said, like I'm not trying, it sounds like I'm trying to put this album in the goddamn dirt, but I'm just elaborating on why I don't like it because it is a controversial opinion. But like the lyrics on this album, they're just very simple and uninspiring. Like I think these three albums lyrically have more depth than the Macadelic album does. I don't think any of the beats are all that impressive either. I don't think the album is bad music, but boring music, which may seem like an oxymoron because boring as an entertainer, which is Mac Miller's, you know, thing here, is a bad thing. But it's just not as charismatic. There's charisma in these albums. I did not see any charisma in this album, and it's not because it's a slower type of album, because later on, like I'll spit of a spoiler, these two, there's tons of charisma, but not in Macadelic. It feels very flat. It feels very one-dimensional. Like a song about, like, maybe this is just my personal preference, but like songs about how high he is and like having a girl do like cocaine off of his dick or something, it's not even delivered cleverly. Like Eminem has some like offensive, vulgar, that's a good word, vulgar lines, but they're always delivered in a funny, clever, witty way. Mac Miller doesn't do that either, and it makes it just fall flat, feel kind of awkward, maybe a little bit juvenile. I don't know. I know it has a market, but it's definitely not me. So overall, Macadelic's going into D tier. Very controversial, but once again, my list, my opinion, I think it goes into D tier. And then we move on to watching movies with the sound off. Personally, I would describe watching movies with the sound off as an experimental type of album. I think that's a fair assessment. Being experimental in music is like a high risk, high reward type thing. Like I mentioned earlier, Death Grips, probably the most experimental band you can ever listen to in your life. And the experiments in that music will either pay off or do the exact opposite. You will either love the new experiment, or you will think it's cheesy, gimmicky, just bad and not like it. I'm a fan of Death Grip, so like that's an example of their experimentations with music paying off. Obviously, the experiments done in watching movies with the sound off isn't even comparable to Death Grips, and I'm not trying to make that comparison between this album and Death Grips. I'm just saying, like, explaining experimental music if you don't get what I'm saying. It still applies, though, you know, calling it experimental. It feels like, in a way, though, that, like, the beat and production, like, whoever's mixing it, was in a competition with Mac Miller. It kind of feels like he was in a competition to outshine. Like Mac Miller was like, all right, here's my part, and then he was like competing with the mixer to like be the main center focus of the album. That's probably my only complaint. Not a legit big complaint, but sometimes it's just like the beats are like, what's going on? They don't really seem to match what Mac is going for vocalistically. Overall, this is a very middle-of-the-road album, in my opinion. The album has some gems, absolutely, but it has a decent amount of misses as well, like suplexes inside of complexes and duplexes. I've very much so enjoyed that song. I enjoyed Bird Call, Avian, Objects in the Mirror. Red Dot Music was okay. My friend told me, oh, that's going to be your favorite song. It was okay. So, with all that being said, I am going to throw this into... I'm going to throw it into B tier. I'm going to throw it into B tier. I was thinking C tier, but the album entirely isn't really, there's nothing wrong with it. B, middle ranking, middle of the road, makes sense. So next we move on to Faces, and this just recently got re-released, so this is the one I listened to last, and I listened to it twice in a row last, and I didn't think it was a bad album whatsoever, but I did think it was a very, very long album, especially listening to it back to back. An hour and a half was very long. Somehow it still felt shorter than the hour-long Macadelic album, so I guess that kind of shows where I feel about these two albums, comparing them. That's probably the most negative thing I have to say about the Faces album, is that it's just too long, and there are probably a couple songs that didn't need to make it, but I understand. This album is emotionally deep because at the time of the original release, which was 2014, Mac was in like a bad mindset, and he actually anticipated dying not too long after releasing this album originally. And if you know that while listening to it, which I did the second time around, you look at the album a bit differently, because the themes of like depression and drug abuse, they're a bigger smack in the face as the listener. I really do like most of the songs on this album, but they do kind of start to sound the same towards the end, especially if you sit and listen to this all at one time. It can be a little bit much. If you do want to just listen to this album, I really wouldn't recommend listening to it all at once. Probably take a break, you know, save it for like a car ride or something like that. But just sitting here at your desk, just listening to it, 90 minutes starts to feel too long. But if you break it up, it does not feel long whatsoever. Tons of good songs on this album. Here We Go, Friends is a good song, but once again runs into that problem of being too long. Like, I don't think that song needed to be like, what was it, 7 minutes long. Angel Dust has like a super catchy chorus. Malibu, It Just Doesn't Matter, that's a good song. It has that Bill Murray, I think his name is, that intro. But so let me talk about that song. It Doesn't Matter, because that intro got me so hyped for the song, but the lyrics and vocals after that very intense hyped buildup, the vocals and lyrics that followed it didn't really match it, but still a really good song in my opinion. Therapy is a good song. Polo Jeans is a good song. Happy Birthday, Wedding, and Funeral, you know, that's a nice little 3-song story. Insomniac with Rick Ross is kind of just a funny song. Uber is a good song. Rain, Grand Finale, knowing Grand Finale, like what I said about Mac's mindset and mental state at the time of releasing this album, listening to like Grand Finale and the bonus track, Yeah, it hits a little bit differently. So I think this is the best of like the middle of Mac Miller's career. You know, I think there's the beginning. I break it up into 3 segments. You got the beginning with these 3. You got the middle, which includes these 5. And then you got the end, which includes these 2. I think Faces is the best middle of his career type music. And I don't know if I want to put it in B or A, tell you the truth, because it's like a good in between with it's not like that Macadelic type beat where it's all super slow and just like uninspiring, but it's not quite frat hype music like Kids or Best Day Ever. It's a perfect in between in my opinion. So overall, I'm gonna throw it in A tier. I was originally going to do B tier, but I'm going to throw it up in A tier because out of the 5 middle, as I described them, Mac Miller albums, I'm definitely recommending this one to a new listener. So Faces goes in A tier, and then we move on to Good AM. Good AM is also a very good in-between of the early hype Mac Miller and the later chill Mac Miller. I think it's a very good in-between, like Faces is. Not as good as Faces, I'll be honest. I don't think it's as good as Faces, but it's still a very good album. He also kept a little bit of the experimental stuff he did from watching movies with the sound off, which I enjoyed. A creepy thing about this album, listening to it in 2022, is that he references his death and he references overdosing on drugs a lot in this album. And listening to it in 2022 is just like, ooh, man. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a line, he's like, I don't want to join the 27 club, which unless that's something I'm completely unaware of, I'm assuming that means dying before 27, which is very eerie because I believe he died at 28. The album is like consistently solid though, I would say. Like, there's not like the high, like Kids has high highs, but then low lows. Good AM is like consistently above average is the best way to describe it. I do think it slightly falls into the pattern that Mac has been in lately in this chronological order of his career, making songs and albums way too long. Like Perfect Circle and Godspeed is a good song, but it does not need to be nearly 8 minutes long. Same with ROS, good song, but it really doesn't need to be as long as it is, because the extra length of the song doesn't add what it's worth in time, you know what I mean? There are good songs on this album though, like Brand Name, Rush Hour, 100 Grand K.I.D.S, ROS, like I said, Perfect Circle / Godspeed, like I said, Jump is a good one, Break the Law, In the Bag, Clubhouse, 100 Grand Kids if I didn't say that. So with all that being said, you know, this is a nice, just middle-of-the-road Mac Miller album. Nothing too groundbreaking, but nothing disappointing. So I'm going to throw it to the top of B tier. I'm going to put it above Watching Movies with the Sound Off, move that down one, and there we go. Next, that takes us to The Divine Feminine. And I had really high hopes for this album. Listening to it for the first time, I like the album cover. I like the name of it. I like the intro to the album. I really had super high expectations for this album, but then my expectations were immediately turned like on their head basically and shattered. I was expecting basically what we got from Mac Miller in his last two albums. I was expecting a emotionally mature, a deep, somewhat philosophical, vulnerable Mac Miller. And the album really made it look like we were going to start that way. It really did, with the first two songs being Congratulations and Dang. I literally couldn't remember the names of them. Those two songs made me think I was going to get what my expectations were in this song. And even the song with Ariana Grande, Stay, I think it's called, isn't a bad song. I think I just kind of like it more than it deserves to be liked, just because I like the story between Ariana Grande and Mac Miller on the song and their relationship and things like that, more than I like the song itself. But after that song with Ariana Grande, the album falls off hard. Very much so. The album immediately becomes like substantially shallow and immature. The lyrics become lazy. I don't want to trash Mac Miller, but Macadelic was a boring album. The Divine Feminine is a bad album. I will go out there and say it. The lyrics are lazy. If I didn't say that already, you can only make so many songs about pussy, how much you love pussy, how much you love sex, how much you love oral sex, how much you love fucking girls, like any synonym for that in the world. There's only so many ways you can very one-dimensionally talk about that before the album starts to get boring and just overall shitty, honestly. Especially because there's a song on this album that was like 8 minutes and it did not need to be that long. There's no clever deliveries here. There's no slick innuendos. There's no double entendres. The lyrics just suck. They sound like they were written by like a 14-year-old kid on Xbox. This album, that's a good way of wording it. This album is like the musical embodiment of like that 15-year-old on Black Ops 2 who hops on and starts calling everyone a virgin because he just lost his virginity the night before. He's like, oh, well, now everyone else is a virgin. Haha. That's exactly the embodiment of this album. It's just super overtly sexual and it becomes super boring. It's like I said, if it was sexual but in like a romantic way, I guess, maybe it'd be a bit different. Or if it was a clever way, or like if there were innuendos and entendres and things like that, double entendres, the album would maybe be better. But since there are none of that, and the last 6 or 7 songs on this album, it's a short album, all kind of suck and sound the same and have the same message and meaning, I can't rank this higher than D tier. It's obviously going to D tier, the very bottom of D tier, below Macadelic. But in Mac Miller's defense, if I got to date Ariana Grande too, I'd probably write some stupid shit like that as well. And the last 2 albums, I'm going to do what I did with the first 3 albums for his last 2. I'm going to rank them both immediately and then explain the rankings after. So Swimming, it's going to the top of S tier. Circles is going to go, obviously you got to see where it's going here. It's going to the very top of S tier. I think Swimming is Mac Miller finding his niche, whatever that, N-I-C-H-E, if you don't know what I'm going for here. I think Swimming is Mac Miller finding that, and Circles is him running with it. Because Swimming is a really good album. Make sure to drop a dislike on Anthony Fantano's review of this album. Oh my God, like, I don't know what he was talking about. He like called this like a very flat album, emotionally shallow, which it's literally the farthest thing from. This is the most emotionally vulnerable we've seen Mac Miller talking about swimming here. Let me just highlight it so you know. Talking about swimming. This is the most emotionally vulnerable and deep Mac Miller we've seen to this date. And this is the kind of Mac Miller I wish we got on the Divine Feminine. He feels really open and honest about his struggles and things like that in his life. And the beats are really, really good. Although my only critique of this album is that there are a lot of beat switches and, you know, just complete 180s on beats that don't need to be done. Like, I think the song is Self-Care. That song ended up being like 5.5 minutes long because the last two are like written on a completely different beat. If that didn't happen, Self-Care would be one of the best Mac Miller songs in my opinion, but since it did happen, it's kind of just like felt very unnecessary. But things like that, you know, very minor critique. The songs that I even find like not the most enjoyable on this album are still really good songs, like Conversation Part 1 and So It Goes. Probably the weaker songs on this album, but still really good songs. It's not a perfect album, but it's really good. Where it becomes perfect, in my opinion, is in the Circles album. This is the best Mac Miller album. This is the best posthumous album, I think, released that I've ever listened to, at least. But in my experience, this is the best posthumous album released ever. It's literally swimming perfected. That's how I feel it. But maybe I'm a bit biased towards this album because I had someone, I'll be honest, I was on a date with a girl and we were in New York City and we were listening, she showed me this album on the way back. And ever since then, I've been in love with the album. Maybe there's like a slight subconscious bias towards this album because of that, but I don't think so. I genuinely think that this is a great album without biases, without personal attachments to the album. Very, very good album. I think, his experimental vocals, I guess you could say, pay off wonderfully. I like that, like, he kind of breaks the norm of, like, you don't have to be a perfect singer to sing. Mac Miller's not a perfect singer, but his singing is great. That either makes sense to you or it doesn't. Like, no, he's not always in tune. No, he's not always hitting perfect deep notes or perfect high notes and things like that. But it's his thing, and he's perfecting it. He's taking it and running with it. It's his thing and he is owning it, and I love that. I love that. I love his voice on this album. I love the lyrics on this album. There's literally not one bad song on this album. Hands is probably the worst song on this album, but literally every other song on this album I love. Blue World, Hand-Me-Downs, Woods, Surf, Complicated, Right, Circles, if I didn't say that already, Once a Day, what else is there? Everybody, I Can See, things like that. Very, very good songs. And I watched a YouTube video about it, is that the last note of this album ends on, I think it's called in music theory, an incomplete note, but then the opening album, or the opening song on this album, plays a note on the piano that completes the incomplete note that the album left off on, which is ironic because if you do it in a circle, you know, it ends, a circle doesn't end, but the album, the last note on the album is an incomplete note, but then the first note on the first song of the album completes that incomplete note. I don't know if that was intentional, like the guy in the video said. I'll link the video in the description, but he says it makes the album a circle. And Mac Miller in an interview described albums as mini life cycles, and this being called Circles, and clearly these two albums were meant to be together, swimming in circles. Oh my god, there's so much depth to this album. The lyrics, you can break them down and find so much hidden meaning to them and depth, and perfect album. I love this goddamn album. I love it. That's about all. I can just fangirl over it. That's all I'll do. I just love the album, and it ranks at the top of S tier. So let me crop this. And that right there is my Mac Miller discography rankings. I feel like it's a bit of a controversial one. Definitely different than everyone else's. Nothing in the C tier, which I thought was kind of funny. But let me know. Did you enjoy this video? What's your favorite Mac Miller album? What's your least favorite Mac Miller album? Who do you want me to do this with next? I'm thinking of doing either like Slipknot, Avenged Sevenfold. Probably going to do Avenged Sevenfold unless I get a better recommendation. But I also would be open to like Logic, Joyner Lucas, Post Malone, things like that. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, you know how YouTube works. Do the like, comment, subscribe, all that junk. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.